my great-grandmother used to tell me stories about settling Cripple Creek, Colorado with her family when she was a child about the turn of the 20th century. And I would sit captivated, drinking lemonade on the porch. One of her children, my great aunt, married someone who was from the South. And so I have a whole extended branch of my family tree who live in Mississippi. We didn't know them well as kids. We weren't close. But at some point in my life as a child, I made the connection that the civil rights movement had happened in the South, that I had family there, and I would occasionally go through periods of time where I would pepper the elders in my family in Colorado with questions like, did the maid that my great aunt employed have to ride in the back seat of the car when my aunt would drive her home? Or those water fountains that were segregated, did the kids in the family actually drink out of segregated water fountains? And what did they think about that? And I remember always feeling like my adults wouldn't really answer the question. They would say things like, well, your aunt didn't like how things were, but everybody would have thought it was uncomfortable, including the maid, if she'd sat in the front seat. Or your relatives didn't like how things were, but ... And I always felt a little unsettled as a kid by the responses that I got because I knew something wasn't really being told. Later, I realized I was asking about my family's complicity, right? I didn't know that word at the time. So fast forward about 20 years, and in graduate school, I met someone who would become a friend who was African American. And the first time we met, we started chatting and engaged in small talk as you do. And I discovered that he was from the same town as my family. And the moment we discovered that, all of my memories of asking my parents and my grandma about what my elders had done during the civil rights movement came flooding back. Actually brought a fair amount of shame in the moment. We're going to talk about shame later in the course. And I made the connection that my family's apathy had to do with his family's well-being. That same period of years, at some point it dawned on me, settling Cripple Creek, Colorado had to do with homesteading, had to do with displacement and genocide of Native peoples. And so I'd gotten this uncomplicated story of celebration of my family's grit, especially the women, that erased this whole other part of my legacy. I want to talk about and point to the ways that white silence, which is so pervasive in most, I would say most white American families, white silence is part of the reason I got uncomplicated disclosures about my family's legacy. And white silence, when it gets passed down like that, is one of the reasons that so many of us, if we suddenly in our 20s, if you're me, have a wake up around anti-racism and racial justice, find ourselves very bewildered around what to do, how to do it, and who even to turn to get support in doing it, because we've literally had passed down to us falsehoods about our family's legacies. Now, saying that is not about saying, oh, I should have thrown my great-grandmother under the bus, or all of our elders were bad people. Human beings are complicated, but it is to say that when we live with stories, because stories are so powerful, that misrepresent the complexity and nuance, not only of our lives, but the way our lives and our familial choices affect other people's lives. In my story, the lives of Native people, the lives of Black people in the South, our moral imaginations become malformed. And one of the most powerful but most challenging parts of my own anti-racism journey has been finding ways over time to ask my elders hard questions about the truth of our family legacy. And I've found ways over time and stayed in it with them to ask questions, even if at first the questions get really uncomfortable, that the answers and the dialogue that has emerged between us over time has become very different than it was the first time I asked the question about where the person who was a maid in my great aunt's house sat in the car. I've been engaging versions of that question with family members, elders now for decades. And the conversations now look different in ways that are important for my own understanding of my legacy, important for my relationships with members of my family, and which have created some productive instability in what has grown sometimes in my relationships with my white family members. My yoga teacher talks about how seeds shake really hard at the microscopic level before something new can come out of them, before growth can happen, because you need to release the things. And I think about that when I think about discomfort with asking questions in our white relationships, our relationships with other white folks. How do I create some productive instabilities to shake up the cohesion that too often is a form of silence that malforms our imagination and the ability to move our relationships and ourselves into healthier relationships with race and anti-racism and racial justice? What would it take to create productive shaking and instability in the white relationships in your life, especially with your family? Your challenge is wrapped up in that question today.